Namaste, Giti ji.
Say,
You're welcome to this conversation on Indic approaches to non-binary gender and sexual orientations. You are one of the pioneering activists and researchers into this area. You were one of the founders of the early activism on non-binary gender and sexual orientations in this country, in India. And you are the insider of the activism in which the non-binary gender and sexual orientation area has been taken over by those groups which are inimical to Indic approaches, Hinduism and Hindu approaches and all that. And we want to hear from you how all this happened with a small introduction to how you entered into this area of activism and research.
it's a long story because actually, when I was in school, I refused to say the Christian prayers. I said, I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in Jesus. So they wanted to throw me out from school. So I was about 15 and a half, and I said, I refuse to apologize. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't see why I should say, Our Father who art in heaven. So they said, we have to expel you. And at that point, I was doing very well in school. I would have become a mathematician or a physicist, actually. And I was also playing table tennis. So I was a table tennis champion at that time. But that didn't help. For them, it was Jesus. How can I not believe in Jesus? So that was one of the key points in my life, because I made this decision that I am not going to close my mind ever. That the mind is the mind, the intellect, the chit is one of the most beautiful things that we are given in this world. So I left that. I left formal education. And I started reteaching myself Sanskrit. I started trying to understand how the architecture of the language is formed. And I wanted to travel around the country. So I bought a small pickup truck. And I bought a small camera. I bought some cameras. And I thought I would taxi people around to make a living and to see the country. I had absolutely no idea of what this country was. So anyway, I was coming back on a flight from Frankfurt because at that time it was very difficult to get equipment in India, and my mother was in the airline, so I got a free ticket. So I managed to get some equipment from Berlin, and I was bringing it back. And I met a 66-year-old woman on the plane, and she said, "Will you take me around India?" So I said, "Sure." She said, "But I have to tell you, I'm Jewish. I'm from Israel." I said, "No problem. I'll take you around." So I drove her 6,000 kilometers around India. And it was my first journey into looking at these temples. And one of the first place I went to was Khajuraho. The first major temple site that I went to was Khajuraho. And it was just incredible. I had never seen anything like this. We were brought up, because we were a partition family, there was absolutely, no images of any Hindu pratimas lying around. Because our families had lived under. So we didn't realize that at that point. It was a very liberal family. Lots of languages were spoken and extremely liberal. But there was absolutely nothing at all no rituals from Hinduism, nothing. But this notion that somehow this deep civilization identity was there. Part of my family is Sindhi, so from the Karachi side, but they were traveling all over. And part of my family is what is today Multan. So they lost everything and they came here. And I think that sort of urge to know our own civilization was such an intense driving force. So that was one part of the story. The other part of the story was once I started, learning all these, reading some of these old texts, some of them which haven't been translated, and studying the language. I realized, particularly the grammar, because the grammar is the basis of the architecture of the language. And then I realized that there's such a rich Shakti tradition, there's such a rich tradition of the feminine, there's such a rich tradition of Chit Shakti, of Chit, Chidambaram. It's everything is linked with the Chittakash. So that is so strong. The Kundalini energy and the Jami energy. And so it was really, I felt I was initiated into this path. And so on the other level, I had the activism because at that time it was very difficult to have, non-binary identity. And, I was driving, by that time I had a gypsy, so I was driving a Jeep and I had camera equipment. So I was breaking all the gender norms, the sexual norms, and so there was that part of the activist identity. And I realized that, we have this incredible tradition, civilization, that can give us so much strength, so much Shakti, that we can derive the best from all the worlds. We can derive the best from the activist world in Europe, in the West, because at that time, that movement was very strong, and the movement here was very weak. And plus, we have this tremendous civilizational memory that we can activate. So that was the basis of both my intellectual and my activist work.
Oh, excellent. I see you looking at these temples, these sculptures, all these from a spiritual perspective. How do you connect your spiritual understanding, inner world practices, contemplative practices, aspect that you get into, and these non-binary gender and sexual orientation understandings that you are into?
But the thing is that if one of the one of the things that when I was reading the Rig Veda, and I came across this concept of this nomination, because in Sanskrit you have these cases, and the first case is how you nominate something, how you name something. And I realized that there was something which was called Dyava Prithvi. And this Dyava Prithvi was in rotation. Now, all the translations at that time were saying Dyava is father and Prithvi is mother. But actually, Dyava comes from Dyu, which is light. So it's the same. Now, in Sanskrit, you can basically have a singular, you can have a dual, and you can have a plural. Dyava becomes feminine dual, but as one unit. The dual is one unit.
Yeah.
It is even more fascinating because it's not simply that you have two of a kind, but that because those two are so interlinked, like twins, they become one of a kind. They're a unit, but made of two.
Yes.
So, and then I realized this has to do with light. Now, my other passion in life is, is light energy, photography, cinema, everything, the moving image, kinetics. So what I started to understand is that the language has this visual, has this tremendous process of inner visualization. Because you can keep creating these compound works through roots. So everything you can go back to a certain root. So you go back to Dyu as light. Now you have dual light. And this is moving with the material principle. This is described as revolving triangles. Now, there is a commentary, another Sanskrit commentary on the Rig Veda, on this particular Rig, which says this is the Dyava were the two mothers. These were the two wombs. So you had this notion, which the Jews have, of the double triangle of the Star of David. Actually, in these older texts was described as the double yoni. Now, in some traditions, you had to keep this one yoni hidden. And in another tradition, you celebrated this harmony of these two yonis. Now that, when you're not, once you have that, you're not in opposition to anything. So I had no problem finding myself within my Indic tradition.
Yeah. So because with this kind of a background in Indic traditions, well rooted in Indic understandings, you entered into activism with regard to these notions. with regard to these orientations and aspects. Uh, how did you find yourself in the company of others who were in that activism?
There was a little bit of fascination for these traditions, but there was a lot of rejection also.
Mm-hmm.
Because my generation was brought up in this so-called secular. And those of us who were genuinely secular, in the sense that we felt okay, that there was a citizen space in which you basically had to find your own path. You know, you had to have a civilian space which was decoupled from whatever institutional belief, which is really the basis of the idea of secularism, which came from the Christian traditions. That you decouple from the church, and you decouple from the clergy, and you decouple from the state, the clergy decouple from the state, and so on and so forth. Of course, here the situation was totally different. So when I started studying these traditions, I realized that I don't need to decouple, because for the simple reason that Hinduism gives us the choice of finding our own Swa-ish Devi or Devta, or a constellation. So you can have your Ish Devi, you can have your Ish Dev, you can have a constellation of divinities. Out of this, I don't know how many infinite crore possibilities that they are. And you have your own modality. So this interior divine, we have all over. I mean, in the sense, my grandmother, she was an Arya Samaji. So she did her chants early morning. Somebody else or something else in the family. So there could be whatever, you learn to commingle with many different possibilities. And this was the beauty of, say, that form of Hinduism which says you're born from the same womb. But each is unique. Each is a unique hardware. Each has its own unique DNA. Each has its own unique memories. Each has its own unique ancestral memory, cosmic memories, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And when you go into this Chit Atma space, you go beyond gender and you go beyond body. And if you have the Kundalini energy, even if you are in sambhog with somebody else, there is a sangam. And in that sangam, again, there is the idea that there is such a tremendous opening of joy, of anand, sampurna anand. You always enter into this Atma space, or this absolutely divine space, which is beyond body. The enjoyment is at the level of the body. But there is always, in that ecstatic moment or in that absolute ecstasy, there is the thing of the third eye opening, or there is, like I said, this notion of Chitanand, divine happiness. So it's different. It develops a very different psyche to the European psyche, which I've also studied. Now, there you see, because you have this notion of the jami, which is something which is a form of mirroring. There is a sense of, you don't have to possess your reflection.
Yeah. So the question is, all these understandings from people like you who have got a deep Indic root understanding of spirituality, contemplative practices, and all that, is that this whole LGBTQI, etc., activism, that is now global. It is global, and most of the Indic activism also is connected to those global activisms and all that. What do you think is the loss to the Hindu aspects or Indic root aspects of such understandings if this is left to be universalized and globalized just like the way it is now?
See, the problem is that a lot of the new activism is coming from, firstly, there is no authentic protest. You see, I mean, why should the LGBTQ protest against the lifting of 370? 370, it means you're equal. Homosexuality is no longer criminalized. why should you want a Sharia law?
Mm.
If you're genuinely, interested, I mean, if there is an authentic protest,
Mm.
you're not going to be, you're not going to get into a totalitarian ideology. You're not going to get into a destructive ideology.
Mm.
And this is also the difference between when, even in the West, when the movement first came about, it was, there was a genuine attempt to be global, to reach out in a good way. I'm not saying that, there weren't problems, there were problems, there was, boundaries and so on and so forth. And I mean, every human being is a part of what their own cultural context is. So there are all these aspects which were there. But there was a notion that there is an authentic protest. Because they were coming from the Second World War. Second World War had been very destructive. I mean, and, they're very... there was a million gay people in Soviet Union. My friends were saying that we were scared every time the doorbell would ring. So there was a very, there was a heavy atmosphere which, which led to this kind of authentic protest. But here we don't have that. Here, by and large, a lot of families, the families will accept, you will make, you sort of find your own space. And if you want to make a career out of activism, then what has happened is that the money which is being poured in is not being actually poured in to really work on gender issues. It's being poured in to basically attack Hinduism, attack any self-affirmation of the Indian state. So the problem is that these activists are being co-opted into a very dangerous form of totalitarianism. And this totalitarianism comes from the idea of victimology, not of celebration. See, in terms of, say, when I study Sanskrit texts of Shakti, it's always about, Sampurnanand, Chittananda. There's always the idea of this beauty, bliss, happiness, ecstasy. It's always, something positive. Politics is a hierarchy of who is the victim. So you're actually splitting. What you're doing is you're actually creating one identity after another. You're creating a hierarchy of identities. And you're creating no form of fluid communication.
Yeah. Actually, I come from my studies of some spiritually oriented transgender communities like Jogapas and Arvanis and these people. And the problem that I was able to see was that these categories and of the whole spectrum that were created were not able to accommodate these people that I was able to study. And from where they come, from what are the roots of their transgenderism? Their transgenderism is rooted in a religious practice towards either Ellamma or Aravan god, or these people that doesn't come out of these so-called secularized categorizations within this spectrum. So this is what happens at the end of the day is a misrepresentation of these traditions, removing the religious aspect in it, religious roots in it, the Hindu roots of these traditions. That is the greatest loss that happens to Indic traditions when we leave the whole activism or theoretical studies to such secularization of these non-binary gender and sexual orientation studies. Another thing that I see is the Victorian morality from the colonial times, whatever went into a kind of self-observation of the Indic culture by the Indic people that made them feel guilty about whatever happened in the past in their society and all that. They started applying this to Kama Sutra material or Khajuraho material or that you were talking about, or the Konark sculptures that people see. And you are aware of Bowdlerization, some kind of a correction of these sculpture artificial material that they wanted to do to suit their newly created understanding from the colonial impact. Can you speak something about those corrections that they were doing about these sculptures and the textual material and all that?
You see, these temples were for, I think, for them, were basically for the colonials, for the missionaries, and even for Islam. I mean, they were the absolute antithesis of what their ideological system was all about. Because in the Christian church, all you can have is you can represent Jesus. But Jesus is always on a cross. So that's again a very masochistic rendering. I mean, why don't you take him off the cross? I mean, you put him on the cross, okay, but you know, you're not going to leave him on the cross forever. That's a very sad thing to do. I'm not saying this, you know, in a frivolous way. I'm actually saying this in a very serious way.
Yeah.
Imagine they come here and they say this is all idol worship and this is all nonsense, and this completely breaks their sense of, because you see, sexuality is one of the most taboo areas in these belief systems. And the fact that you can have the pleasure concept, because if you're predicating a belief system on martyrdom, how are you going to have any kind of pleasure-oriented life energy? You cannot have it. And if it's staring into your face all the time, you know, in this form, in that form, here, there, I mean, you know, it's going to drive you nuts. And, you know, what the Portuguese church did was just horrific. I mean, you know, there's very little of the temple tradition left in Goa, or what was colonized by the Portuguese. At least the British didn't destroy it to the same extent. Of course, Islam destroyed everything. I mean, everything that they could lay their hands on, they tried to smash. Now, why is this fear? The moment you have a psyche which is based on shame of the sexual, and look at even, I mean, you look at the dress code in some of these old temples. See, the women are in the nude, or they have very little clothing on. The men too, you know, there's very little clothing. I mean, this is celebration of the body. Whereas in the whole Victorian tradition, I mean, you just, you know, the woman has a corset, and I don't know, she's tied up some 1,000 times or something. You know, the body is, the clothes are meant to tie the body. You know, and even if she's a nun or a priest, then you're supposed to sort of, again, like deny your body. So the tradition is very anti-body.
Yes.
And that was a huge problem. Now, the other problem is, of course, that what they then, Indologists, then Western Indologists then created, saying that, oh, you know, this is all idol worship, and abstraction comes from Islamic geometry. And that's really what really infuriates me, because in all of these temples, the way they work out geometry, graphics, you know, the movement of images. And, you know, because I was coming from a film background, you know, in those days we worked with the film. Now, what is actually film technology? Film technology is actually you're shooting frame. You're shooting 24 frames in a second. And then the projector is moving that. When you're projecting it back, then you're moving it. That's how you're creating movement. What are the temples doing? The temples have these complex, you know, variations on one theme. Or one can be on a symbol, can be, you know, they can move from geometry to human figure to animal figure. You can see it from one side, it becomes something else. You see it from another side, it becomes something else. And so the movement is created through the parikrama. There's no centralization in that sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a womb space, you know, you can have a garbhagriha, and you can go there, but many of the older temples, there were actually many of them had no centers. So you had this whole notion of a very complex cinematography in stone. Moving frames in stone, but even more complex, because the frame, you know, the Cinema frame is moving one frame at a time.
Hmm.
This is going, you have like a pillar. You have one perspective here, one perspective here, one perspective here, one perspective here,
Non-linear rather than linear. Yeah.
and 8 perspectives.
Yes.
A spiral.
Non-linear. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
The moment you start to experience these things, you're automatically initiated into a non-binary space.
Hmm. Hmm.
You don't
Yeah.
even realize it, it just sort of, you just go somewhere, it initiates you, you have strange dreams, you research, you work, then again you're back on the road. It's just, I don't know, I was just driven, I don't know where I got the energy from to do what I did those years.
Hmm. And you mentioned Kundalini and all that. So you were able to see such tantric yogic aspects in these sculptures and in these temples and their architecture also.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. In fact, after many years, I just stopped reading because I felt the memories were coming, and I felt like I could access certain states without even, with nothing. I mean, with no images, with no words, nothing. I mean, there is such a, there is, it takes you into dimensions and dimensions and dimensions.
Yeah, so that's another area where it gets totally misunderstood by the contemporary Indians themselves. They when they look at this kind of heritage, they probably trained in a post-colonial, post-Christian world of education with that kind of a legacy. They have developed a self-hate looking at this kind of heritage from this newly trained understanding, uprooted from their own roots. They started misunderstanding themselves, they started misunderstanding their own heritage, completely divorcing it from the deep roots that you are mentioning from Tantra, Kundalini, Yoga, and such contemplative inner world practices to which these things have been connected. And you have been repeatedly saying that it is at that level that the binaries, all the binaries disappear. And there is a whole world that gets opened for you where you don't talk about the binaries anymore and all that. So that is another loss by leaving the theoretical studies and the activism to such uprooted understanding of Indian culture, Indian heritage. That's another problem that we are getting. So one problem is that Indic traditions, Hindu traditions of non-binary lifestyles and practices are misrepresented from the global perspective that is coming, not coming from an Indic root, not coming from the Hindu root. And another thing is it is creating a hate. It is creating a self-hate among Indians and Hindus, uh, particularly among youngsters. Uh, the younger generation, which is now towards a broader understanding of these gender and sex orientations and all that, uh, they come from the stories of victimization of such orientations from different other societies, other faiths, and other ideological orientations. And they attribute it to Indian tradition also, where it was not there. Yeah. So, what was your experience in working among those global groups of activists and all that?
Well, you see, the problem was that the moment they brought up the idea of religion, it was always monotheism.
Hmm.
I always said, Hinduism is not a belief-based religion.
Hmm. Hmm.
You have bhakti, you can have, someone like me. I'm interested in the mind. I'm interested in chicks. That's my hardware. I mean, I am like that.
Hmm.
Somebody's a dancer or a musician, and she or he's a performer.
Hmm.
You can perform the divine. I mean, I'm an interior person. I will go inside. I have more of a in a yogic kind of. So I will go inside, but somebody else can manifest it from the outside. Somebody can be a Karam yogi. So you don't have the notion of this obsessive belief.
Yes.
See, why should you want to say, "Our Father who art in heaven" in school every morning? Or even worse, why should, in Islam, why should you have a loudspeaker to say your God is the greatest and that is it? And that's absolute exclusion. You say it 5 times a day, it does something to you. How can then you be friendly with somebody else? You'd always consider somebody who doesn't have that belief system to be your enemy. Because that's how your civilization is. It's drilled into you. It's like a propaganda. There's nothing free about it. Now, when I tried to intervene in any of these spaces and I started to bring in, these different facets, the Europeans would hear me and they would get fascinated on an individual level. They would want me to speak. They would, invite me for a dinner, have a nice bottle of wine. On a private level, it was fine. But they got scared on a more theoretical level. And I think that there's a fear of the brain. The problem with a lot of these activist traditions is, including communism. Communism is one of the worst. Is that you're scared of culture and you're scared of the brain. Because you're an ideology. So if you allow people to, think openly, it's okay for you. So, they would say, yes, but, we cannot have Hinduism. And the sad thing is that I knew some, young Indian children at that time, and they were forced to have religious classes. Open, not necessarily one religion, but what was taught? Only the 3 monotheisms. They automatically were excluded.
Yeah.
So you had this space of being exotic, at least in the Western sense, but even that space got eroded. But in the Marxist sense, there was no space. There was absolute fear. And I think what's happened here, very sadly, is that there is such a self-hate. Many young people, they have a self-hate. They don't know how to deal. Because you're young, you're fragile. So you don't know how to handle challenges. You don't know how to handle issues. So you start to hate. It's very easy. It's very easy to have to witch hunt.
Yeah.
In French, they say book émissaire. So you just project onto anybody or any tradition that you do. So you have a Modi hating syndrome, you have an Indic hating syndrome, anything that you can push onto, which is beautiful, you hate because you're unhappy.
Yeah.
And that unhappiness you glorify as victimhood. And then you indulge in a cult frenzy. Is exactly what happened with if you study the history of communism or the Nazis, are very similar. I mean, Nazis were National Socialism. The hatred was because Jews were bright people, they were intelligent people, they had assimilated really well, and they were doing well, and that they felt they had to take away their wealth.
Yeah.
And in the Soviet Revolution, after the Soviet Revolution, people think it's only Stalin which is bad. No, but I think Lenin it starts with Lenin, because they started what was called the secret police, which is called the Cheka, and they were just like 4 or 5 people, and they would say, okay, reading Tolstoy, kill her. It was like that. I'm not joking. This is really the records which are coming out. This is too bourgeois.
Yeah.
This writer is too bourgeois. Kill their entire, forms of their own culture, which is what Mao did also with the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
Mao if you have a hatred of culture so much, what are you going to do? You're going to set up cults.
Mm.
You're going to set up rioting. You're going to set up cults of violence.
Mm.
Because that's the only way you can release your negativity. In
Yeah.
a And that is unfortunately what a major section of the movement has become. And that's what the movement threw up. I mean, it's the gay movement which created someone like a Devdutt Patnaik. I mean, he came to me many years ago wanting to learn something about the unions and so forth. He totally manipulated whatever I talked to him about.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
Not
See, these people have not actually moved in the cults, Hindu traditions. We should not use the word cults. Hindu traditions where uh, what from a Western perspective, from the LGBTQ movement perspective, might appear to be fitting into their movement, into the spectrum that they're showing, but actually has a different root than what they're talking about. It probably sometimes is not even a sexual orientation. It is probably some yogic practice. It is probably some contemplative practice. Outwardly appears to be some kind of cross-dressing, but actually it is not about cross-dressing. It's only an apparent cross-dressing. For example, the Shaktiya practitioner who is a male but wears a woman's dress, he is not actually interested in any sexual orientation at all. It's not all about sexual orientation. He is into something else, but the language of costume that he is using is for the outer world, for the observing world, is the costume of a woman.
mm-hmm.
The inner practice that he is into has nothing to do with sexual orientation at all there. But these things do not come out. If the whole discussion is left to this whole big spectrum of 52 or 28 or whatever gender variations that these people talk about, everything every time comes about sexual orientation only. It is all about sexual orientation. Actually, sometimes it looks as though this whole movement, this whole activism has been over sexualized also.
It's over
Uh,
sexual.
yeah, it is over sexualized. It is actually there is so much about sexual disorientation, and within sexual disorientation, there is a voluntary sexual disorientation on the part of ascetics, sannyasis, and brahmacharis, and there is an involuntary sexual disorientation among infertile women, infertile men, and all that. And these things uh, have been accepted in Hindu society from the perspective of, okay, if I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, I do Vajikarana to solve the infertility problems or lack of sexual potence kind of problems and all that. And it is taken easy. It is just taken as normal. This is part of life. It was always taken as part of life. And a person who is voluntarily sexually disoriented is not looked down upon at all. It is just taken as normal. It is just, okay, some people are not oriented, some people are disoriented, some people have a different orientation. All these varieties were very well accepted. But this movement, the current activism, is all about orientation, orientation, orientation,
Right.
not about disorientation.
Exactly.
Uh, and once you come into that orientation, it is all about sexual orientation, and it is all about sexual activity, and the whole activism got over sexualized.
Yes.
Uh, yeah. Uh, so, your understanding of coming from your temple studies and culture studies, can you help us know more about how the discerning between apparent sexuality and inner non-sexuality and all that has been connected to the understandings that you got from these studies?
You see, the thing is that once you start looking at it from the aspect of Kundalini energy, and once you realize that this Kundalini energy, you can basically move in it at the level of attraction, maybe to another human person, or you can move this attraction at so many levels. Because once you have spiritual connection and spiritual communication, you can use this erotic energy, this Kundalini energy is not, it doesn't have to be over-sexualized all the time. I mean, that's why you have the notion of kamras, but you also have the notion of, rati, or, something which is non-body. And they don't come together. I mean, it doesn't say that you shouldn't have kamras.
Yeah.
That's why in Khajuraho you have, beautiful kamras. And then you also have like very subtle depictions in which there's the energy points. It's not sexualized. The body is their erotic energy points. I mean, if I take somebody there, because it's so hidden, I mean, it took me 15 visits to Khajuraho to uncover this. Because, you have the notion, one has in Hinduism, the notion that there is something sthul. And there's that sukshma. So you can move into that sthul calm, and you can also move into the sukshma calm. Rati. So all these different possibilities, and if you take it on to the mind level, I mean, exactly, where all our spiritual traditions are. I mean, you can have it with yoga, you can have it with forms of, third gender in the Devi space. It's a spiritual thing. When you perform something, I mean, you're performing, say, a transition. I mean, Krishna can become Kali and, identify with Radha as Sakhi Vallabhi.
Yeah.
Or you can have a Harihar, which can be pure cerebral.
Yeah.
So it's energy forms that come together. Or you have the Devi, and there's the whole notion of the triadic Devi, where you have the Kali, which is the tamas, which is the fuel, which is the fire, the tejas. You have Saraswati, which is your ras, your vidya ras, your music ras. And you have Lakshmi. You have all these different energy spectrums. I mean, basically, when one thinks of the Kundalini, one thinks in terms of energy spectrums, and the body is one space of that. And also that attraction also has something spiritual. Because what do you have? You have the idea that you have attraction to someone, and there is some karshan. So it's like a magnet, which is, where both energy fields are coming together and harmonizing into something beautiful. So you have the term like samakarshan, some karshan. So you have all these things with some. I mean, even Sanskrit is actually a sandhi of sam and krit. In Sangam is what? Sam and gam. Sangam. You have some lila, and then that's the other thing. But the Devi says everything is a lila. So sexual play is like a lila.
Yeah.
Kamras is a lila. And then we have the concept of ras.
Yeah.
See, with the Western world, anytime you have a spiritual connection or, something beautiful, there's a problem that they will try to sexualize that. Whereas here, you have a space. You have a space where you can communicate very finely with somebody, and you feel there's a trishna in that. There is a very beautiful sense of connectivity. But that doesn't have to be sexualized. And that's the other side of the story. It's like in Again, in the West, you have normative heterosexuality, you have the norm, and then you're fighting with the norm. There we don't have that. If somebody's in grihastha, I'm happy to enjoy it. They know I'm not part of a grihastha tradition. They recognize it.
Regarding these yogic concepts, what I remember is the word Jogappa, the community on which I was researching. That word comes from Jogin. Originally, there is a tradition called Jogin tradition, and the male version of that, transgenders who become Jogins, males who become Jogins are called Jogappas. And that word Jogin has got Yogin in it.
Yeah,
Yogin has turned into Jogin.
yeah.
And the yoga aspect in it, yogin aspect in it, is what gets hidden if you talk about these people, if you misunderstand these people in terms of, say, for example, hijras, or in terms of the general third gender, very broad third gender that people create and all that. But if you get into the actual details of this, what I have seen in my field work is that most of these, either whether it is Jogins or Jogapas, they say that we are not interested in sexual orientation at all. We are not interested in any sexual aspect at all. We are the bhaktas, the devotees of, say, for example, Yallamma here in this cult, or if it is Arvanis, we are devotees of Arvan and all that. So there is a much more complex relationship between, see, for example, you can be a transgender male and can get married. Yellamma is a female goddess. You are getting married to her. Even the Jogins are getting married to another female Yellamma, the goddess there. So this, what is that marriage there is another, at a different level, at a yogic level, at a totally different level. And another aspect that this gets misrepresented in these representations in courts of law, in legal cases and all that is, they have mentioned one Sivasatulolu, one group. And these Sivasatulolu are professional spiritual possession people. They participate in temple fairs and festivals, and they get possessed by goddesses. And males who get possessed by a female goddess repeatedly get feminine tendencies in them, and they are identified as transgenders. Again, they are mistook for, the people mistake them for transgenders, but it is not that. The story is all about spirit possession. And this spirit possession also, as you keep repeatedly saying, is a Kundalini activity. It is what people call spirit possession is a yogic phenomena. It is a Kundalini phenomena that is happening in them, and they talk about it. They know the details of that and all that, but such details of an inner contemplative spiritual practice of yoga, inner spiritual contemplative practice of spirit possession, avahana, that is happening in them, and all that completely gets lost if you do not give priority to a Hindu way of interpreting these phenomena and universalize them in terms of the worldwide secularized LGBTQI movement. That is another agony for these people. If you take these people into these movements and processions and paradings and all that, they completely get lost in it, and they feel so agonized that they are also being included into the herd of all these people, and they are also looked down upon, or they are also categorized as somebody looking for another male partner or female partner or something like that. So who has to hear to their agonies, about their agonies, that they are completely misrepresented, their spiritual aspect is not being covered and all that. So your emphasis on spiritual practice, your emphasis on the inner spiritual practices and inner world ideas with regard to this, it becomes very, very important in this context of Hindu way of looking at the ancient Hindu traditions of what otherwise looks to be some general non-binary gender and sexual orientation practices. Please share your views on this.
Yes, I worked with this whole thing of kale. They have it in Himachal a lot on a full moon night, and they play with the paris. They call it kale with the paris. So this is again one of the Leela traditions, again associated with the Devi. Exactly what you were saying, and it's very incredible because I started showing them images of Devi Pratimas and all kinds of different things, and the some of the women who'd never had kale themselves, suddenly during the workshop they went into trance, and
Mm.
um, the energy is so powerful that everybody in the workshop could feel it. Even those of us who weren't in kale, I mean, we could all feel it. It is really, I mean, it's very intense. You really feel that something else is happening, and it is very funny because eventually, the NGO who had given money for the workshop came to ask the women, so what happened with the workshop? Saying what did you benefit? Because the NGO is basically the usual: you're destitute, you're poor. They have the same sort of Christian thing that we're going to uplift you on that level, but they cannot take spirit energy. So one of the women said, uh, we played with the goddesses.
Uh,
You should have seen the person's face. The person was Indian. His face just fell.
uh.
But I mean, this is really what the problem, this is really the agony which I think is there. And
Yes.
I go through the agony myself, which is why I feel I cannot even, I sometimes feel, I've worked as an activist, and what did I achieve in all those years? Maybe what I wanted to do 30 years now, you all are doing. But sometimes I really think, there is a complete disassociate with the spiritual in these traditions, in the energy. I mean, how can you always be fixated on the human level, on the lowest human level?
Yeah.
And the other problem also is that the problem also of a lot of this secularization is you are looking at the lowest common denominator.
Mm. Yes.
So you're not looking to get uplifted, or you're not looking to get
The
you know
details,
exactly
details,
inspired, or
specificities, the nuances, the greater nuances, more detailed nuances. So you want something in common among all these, and yeah, the least common denominator.
there's always a base level, and you're anti-mind, you're anti any intellectual, you're anti the spiritual, you're anti the intellectual, you're anti any kind of depth. So you're always living with this kind of fear. And then, if you ghettoize, these groups ghettoize, then they do mean things to each other. The way we've seen this with Indian politics, it's the same thing that they're doing there. And then, there's huge amount of money. I mean, who is Indira Jaising? Why should she get, I don't know, 1 crore of money for, taking away the law, and she doesn't turn up? She's fighting the case on both sides. So there's no dharam also. You see, there's no notion of that there is a chit dharam, there is a kam dharam, there is a swadharam. So there is no ethics left at all.
Mm. Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, is that all you want? Is you want to go to a park and have 5 minutes of jerking off? I don't understand it. I don't get it. I mean, I don't get it. My inner personality, my hardware doesn't get it. So I understand, if you're working, if you're part of a temple tradition, you're part of that, the spirit tradition, and you go into different consciousness spaces. I mean, I've been into spaces where there's either so much light, or there are very few people I can talk to about.
Yeah. If you look at the categorizations in the whole spectrum that they do, uh, there is no scope, there is no space for the other categories like spirituality, like a religious practice, like Kundalini, like Atman, like none of these things actually are in the criterion of classification. The whole criterion of classification is all about sexual orientation.
Yes, that's it.
Just body at the body level.
Yeah,
So
and
this is
at the crude body level, it's not even,
yeah.
it's not even something that, you think, at least what you have in Khajuraho is you have, you aspire to, mm, make it into something finer.
Mm,
You aspire to something else,
yeah.
even at body level.
Yeah. So that is where actually there comes a lack of representation or misrepresentation for these Indic traditions, where actually the very motivation or the starting point of the lifestyle or practice is spiritual. It is all starting from a spiritual angle, and all that is getting totally hidden from here, because you have to somehow fit into this whole spectrum that has been created by these people. It is all about what kind of sexual orientation or what kind of cross dressing, cross costume you have. That's all.
Exactly,
But
exactly.
there is no mention of the origin of this motivation of this. There is no religious criteria in it. There is no spiritual criteria that is mentioned here. So you don't get mentioned at all into any of this whole spectrum.
No, but see, even the root of yogini is huge, to fuse.
Mm,
Here comes j, that is the phonetics things, many languages, here changes into j. Now yoni comes from the same root as to fuse.
mm, mm,
And the yoni is represented as three eyes, Triambak.
mm, mm,
Krishna is the form of Triambak. He is part of that constellation. See, the
mm,
other thing is that you don't have gender war. If you don't have you basically feel that every gender has to attain the best in themselves. They have to arrive at their finest potential.
mm,
And if one person achieves their finest potential, it brings the other person to try to get their finest potential.
mm.
You're not going to the lowest potential,
Yeah.
lowest common denominator.
Mm. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And that is why you have the Sangam. I mean, you have, for instance, you have a sculpture in which you have, uh, there's a fusion in a wheel of, say, 8 human, whatever gender.
Mm,
But they're fused together. They're fused at the umbilical cord,
mm,
at the nabi.
mm, mm,
Now, you're going back into the cosmic womb. You have an experience of the cosmic womb.
mm, mm,
And what you're also saying is that uh, what is the concept of para? Para is when you say, see, you have param as the first.
mm,
And even the English word primary comes from param, is derived from param.
mm. Ultimate, beyond.
Yeah. No, para is what is beyond.
Mm, yeah.
So, this is another aspect of the Devi, that
Mm,
you move from your human confines into the para,
mm,
attain the param.
mm. Yeah.
But also, because we're still human, we have to keep coming back into the human.
Mm,
Otherwise, we just go into the Paramatma and, lose a human body.
mm,
So there is always this sort of relationship between, moments when you move into the para space and then you have to come back
yes.
to the human form. So, and these are all transition spaces. That's why you have utsavs. That's why you have an utsav at a specific time, according to the moon or the sun or whatever, they vary in different parts of the country.
Mm,
And what happens at that time is that, you have the idea, you have the thing that you can, as a collective entity, move into another space, move into the para space.
are you writing down all these things as a collected material, collected interpretations into a whole, a coherent whole somewhere as a book?
No, I mean, I've even stopped writing because it's only because of my work with you that I've actually started to.
You photograph and you have very good visual representations also, and so you can put those pictures and then all these interpretations that you have, and that will definitely make a very good book. Giti ji, you probably have to very soon come out with a book on all this. The whole world will be benefited.
But I just feel that this is a drop in the ocean, and I feel that uh, you gave me the space. I've been boycotted in India. I mean, actually, I've been invited more outside the country than to give lectures and slide lectures and even write, write the occasional article or something. Than here. Here, the movement is totally boycotted. So I really have to thank you. I really have to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to be able to present this work in my own country.
That one single temple that you chose from Delhi, that near Agra, that whole one single temple and all the sculptures and the interpretations from that itself, actually, I think makes a very good book. It's a whole book full of information and analysis and understanding. It will take people from uh, what is apparent to what is actually inherent in it, and the deepest understanding. Can you say something about that Tejpur? What is that temple? Tejeshwar.
This is in Delhi, what I showed during the workshop. That was Delhi was called, one of the words for Delhi was Yoginipura.
Hmm.
And the so-called Qutub complex, they built their first masjids on those temples, on those old temples.
Hmm.
And when I used to go, when I was young, that is, when I was in my teens, and we went there, the only thing which was important was to go up the tower, the minar. And we were never told that these are Hindu temples. When I started doing this work, I said, these are Hindu figurines, everywhere they're figurines. And I started working very deeply with the place. I really have memories. I can see some of the things in the original. And then I started to uncover that the entire city was a temple city. I mean, I gave Hariji a proposal of, how Delhi was turned into the caliphate. But really, this is one of the finest temples. And unfortunately, even the historians, all they'll say is, oh, there were some Vaishnav temples, there were some Jain temples. I mean, you have to get into the basis of it. These are really third gender. These are the Yogini temples, which were absolutely, and Yogini is an inclusive thing because you can have all kinds of divinities. But that whole space, that whole non-binary space, that whole fine space in these, which you can still see despite all the destruction, is still there. But I can tell you that, the Defense Colony Welfare Association is in one of those old temples, which is converted into a Gummad today. And this is also the genocide which has happened. But on the other hand, like I said, the memory is so powerful that once it starts to come out and once people start to tune into this, I think something very beautiful can evolve.
Yeah.
The other thing about this temple is that it was linked. It's not like the temples had a root.
Mm.
So say you take a root of the Yogini belt.
Mm.
Maybe the Yogini, there are other constellations of divinities, because often but they're all say along the Chambal, or they have they meet on certain river points.
Yeah.
Delhi could be Yamuna, and I have memories of a temple near the Yamuna, which I haven't been able to uncover, but I have very powerful memories, which I have not been able to find, but dreams, memories, whatever you want to call them. But the thing is that when you have these Hindu kingdoms, they built also in Delhi. So you had the Pratihar dynasty, which built in Madhya Pradesh. They built in Delhi. Delhi was part of their kingdoms. Now, if you look at the routes on the Chambal, what do you have? You didn't have Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Delhi. The route on the Chambal near Gwalior, you have these incredible two yogini temples, and you have a temple city, Bhakteshwar. You have a temple on a hill, yogini temple on a hill, which now they in social media they're writing about it and saying that the parliament was actually designed on the temple. This is on a hill, and in the 80s when I went there, I took two young people from the Gwalior Museum, very sweet. And it took us hours to find the place. There was no road, there was nothing. And then there is a Naresar Yogini site, which is not like a round temple, there's a Chamunda temple over there, and you go into a ravine and there's water. Now there's not much water left, but that would have been the hidden form. So one on the hill, the Mitavali temple on the hill, round, open to the sky, the other hidden. Now you continue on into Rajasthan, and you have a whole belt of temples on the Chambal River, where you have waterfalls, you have gorges.
Yes.
And some of them, they're still under the Archaeological Survey of India, so they still work. I mean, they still have a lot of beautiful imagery, but a lot has been destroyed. So they were entire routes. So you didn't have the idea that this temple that I show from Delhi was isolated. It was part of a whole constellation of temples.
Oh, yeah, that's...
And you see the same thing. You see, if you go to Gujarat, you have Patan, Modhera, Sidhpur. So you'll always find routes.
Okay.
In Karnataka, you have Hampi, but you have so many, in Karnataka, you have so many places which are filled. I mean, I'm not getting the names now, Belur, Alibet, these are all known places, but there are also some not known places which were on the route, but were destroyed. Because when I was driving around, I had notes and went to all these places. So they were also on the route. Same thing with Alampur.
Jogulam.
So AP, Andhra Pradesh, the Alampur is linked to Hampi. There is a certain route of temples which you can still find.
How do you get these connections? Did you come across some text that was mentioning connections among all these temples, or your own intuition, or sculptural style, or how do you identify these connections?
A combination of various things. I think once you start doing this work, it started to come after maybe 10, 15 years. Automatically you would start to see these connections like this. Initially, there's a phase where you're still researching, you're still looking at text, you're still a little bit on the outside of it all. You're still in the realm of fascination. And once you start, I was driving around the country, so, and in Himachal I used to walk. So then I went right up to Spiti and Ladakh and all these places. Partly walking, partly driving, partly, combination of different. And then every journey you start to, opens up something else. And then you do the research, you find the text, then somebody tells you something, and then suddenly you see these roots, and then you realize, yes, like I realized also there's a connectivity because you start working with, say, certain mythology, say like the Sati mythology. Now, in the Mahabharata Puran, that's a Shakti text. Actually, the whole idea of the body being cut is that you have energy points, you have Shakti peaks all over the country.
Yes.
And these Shakti peaks actually establish some kind of a Shakti cosmology. So you're actually mapping the entire country, the physical geography on a cosmic plane.
Yes.
So you go away from gender. This is the whole thing. You start with gender, then you go away from gender.
Yes.
So then the mythology only becomes a vehicle for something else happening.
Yeah.
Then you realize, okay, when you start to map out some of these points, you realize, okay, there's a river tradition. There's certain geographies which are common to them. It's like I go to Bhedaghat and I realize that this is geographically a very high energy point. And the same thing happened in Europe when they built the, Notre Dame and, some of the big churches. Some of them were built on what is called earlier pagan sites, but I don't necessarily think so. They also found special things in their geography, special points in their geography which had high energy.
Mm.
So you find, it's like the Pavagadh. Pavagadh was very powerful. That's again a Shakti Peeth. And all of these things, you climb up some several thousand stairs. And I was very fit then. So, 4:30 in the morning, you climb up and you see this incredible dawn. You see a lake on this hill, like a plateau. And the area, the geography of that point is so powerful. How they found these places built on that, how they took, stones up, don't ask me. It's a mystery. I mean, either they flew it or what they had, what technology they had.
Do they belong to the indigenous traditions there in Europe? Do they belong to the indigenous cultures or communities there, or they are identified as Christian temples or something like that?
I mean, some of them are. It's like Shastra walls, they say built on something more ancient. But you see, even with the church tradition, Christianity has on one hand a very negative tradition, institutional tradition, but whatever it is, it allows for some transcendence. So you see, you take the church and you take the music, they build this, even though like I think they should, like I always say that, take Jesus away from the cross, they really reform their theology. But some of their churches, though it's heavy, but it's a cold climate. You can't make open air temples there. But what you have then is you make beautiful organs, and so you develop, say, a stream of music with that, which also takes you on a transcendence. So you have composers, say, like a Bach or something.
Yeah.
Beautiful mathematics, beautiful sound. It works with resonance. So you work with sensory intelligence. Now, if you go, say, to the Greek pantheon or the Roman pantheon, they weren't necessarily so developed on the spiritual way, the way, say, Hinduism was. And I'm saying this without any, chauvinism or anything, because I don't think we need chauvinism. But it's a much more human-oriented pantheon. And the Roman pantheon was a much more imperial pantheon. And also, the Christianity of the Armenians is very different.
Okay. So even there you see these energy points and all that?
It's still restricted. I mean, it doesn't have like the third spaces or whatever, but there are spiritual traditions. There is at least a level of the spirit. And, I remember when I was fighting with my nuns over, this, whether I should say the prayer or not. And I said, I won't. And I quoted then Dostoevsky. And I realized that, I read Brothers Karamazov when I was 14 years old, and they had a community center library, so I found Dostoevsky. But he's very accurate when he says that you have the hero who is the sort of naive brother. But he is the believer, and he has the spiritual believer. You have Ivan, who's very thoughtful and very questioning, but he becomes the nihilist.
Oh, that's
very interesting.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and Ivan is the one who says, man made God. I mean, man invented God. So it's a very, very powerful. Very powerful if you're seeing it as what the Orthodox clergy was, and in fact, the character of Ivan, in some sense, is a precursor of communism in a certain way.
Yeah, something like Kundalini or some inner world body-centric ideas that they give, or they talk of something beyond the body, beyond the world kind of energy.
They talk of something beyond the body, but they're not able to. You see, in our tradition, we don't negate the body. If you want to come back to the body, we come back to the body. It's not like either or. You
Mm.
always have a transit point.
Yes.
You can have the yogi who totally abandons the body and who can leave it and go into a samadhi.
Yeah.
But you can also have somebody that you come back. You're a bhogi. I mean, in some sense, I'm a bhogi too. I enjoy my South Indian coffee. It gives me great pleasure. These are small things in life, but they give me absolutely great pleasure. I don't. I just have my one cup. Whatever. But so you have the idea that you have bhog and ras. The problem, of course, even in the spiritual traditions in the church is somewhere this masochism is always there.
Mm.
Somewhere you have to punish yourself. And it's very dangerous, because even it's like, I mean, I know this about Christian schools because, when we were young, they used to try to sell us pamphlets called Soldiers of God. I don't know whether they do it now. And it was all about, people being tortured. Somebody was torturing somebody.
Mm. And that is where this whole victimization
Exactly.
narrative comes, and even this whole non-binary movement has been converted into a victimization.
Yeah. Because,
Ironically, it comes from victimization from the church towards this non-binary, and now it is the church which talks about the victimization of the non-binary.
exactly.
Ironically, it is
Right.
so contradicting, it is so self-contradicting.
And you see, that's why it remains stuck.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, even the finest minds, even the sensitive people get stuck into it.
As you rightly pointed out, it is here on the Hindu side. It is celebration. It's not victimization. It is celebration. It is articulation. It is expression. It is manifestation of a more nuanced inner world that is getting represented in this whole spectrum of non-binary gender and other aspects. Actually, super gender, something which is beyond gender, is
Yes.
at the back of all this multiple gender thing. Multiple gender is possible because there is something which is super gender.
See, I mean, what is the principle of Shakti? Devi says, I am beyond gender.
Yes,
I'm
it's
of all genders and I'm beyond gender.
yes.
And if you look at it on a pure linguistic level, say when she takes on the name Shiva, now Shiva
Mm,
will contain Shiv.
mm,
You see the feminine form, and say we do away from physical, gender. But what it is actually saying is the feminine gender, we're calling it the feminine, but actually it includes the masculine.
exactly. Yeah. So the fluidity at the expression level is rooted at something which is beyond, something which is super gender. Because
Yes,
there is the actual entity is beyond, because the actual entity is super gender, all the outward expression of that is so fluid.
yes,
It can be anything. It can move from one end to the other in the whole spectrum of
yes.
all this. Yeah. So with that, thank you very much, Giti ji.
Thank you.
Uh, this was a great opportunity. We have so much to explore from you. Younger generation has to get trained under learned people like you. Uh, Please give us an opportunity to provide younger sishas to you to get trained in the interpretation of temple sculpture, the entire richness of our heritage that we have in the yogini temples all over the country, and all your rich experience on the theory side and the practice side and activism side. It should get to the second generation is our wish. Please help us in doing that. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to have this enlightening conversation.
Thank you so much. And thank you for giving me the possibility to work with you. And for me, it's a dream come true. It's very
Thank you
beautiful
very much, ma'am.
working